All right, welcome back to another Crypto Vagabonds Q&A. I want to start the presentation. Remember that this Q&A occurs every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to interact with me on a more regular basis, Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, we're also in Clubhouse. And today we're going to talk about China. And I didn't comment anything, but the first slide of this presentation is pretty much a disclaimer. Nothing that we say here should be considered financial, tax, or legal advice. So today I want to talk to you about China and how China is breathing down US neck, how China is maybe catching up with the US. If you have seen our previous presentation, there's a video, if you didn't see the presentation, where we talk about geopolitics explained in simple terms. There's going to be a part 2 to that. And if you watch this one, it's going to be easier for you to understand the part 2. And if you watch the first part of geopolitics, you can understand what we're talking about on this presentation. So here we go. Pretty much China is catching up with the US. China is going up. And we're going to be looking at 3 points for this presentation. There's a lot of things to cover in China, so we're going to be dividing this in different presentations. There's going to be a few parts, maybe 3 to 4 parts. So what I want to invite you guys to just think about for a few seconds before getting to the presentation is, when you grew up, what was China? So when I was growing up, China was this place which was a mystery. People were in poverty. There was no mattresses. I saw documentaries showing how poor China was. So that's the image that I think a lot of people grew up with China. But the thing is, things have changed significantly. And China, for you to have an idea, is the 4th largest country on Earth in terms of territory. China does not use all of its territory. This is a subject for another video, but it is, in terms of territory, the 4th largest country on the planet. China has borders in the north with Russia. And I'm going back to the map so you can see here. So north of China here, that is Russia. You have Mongolia here, but that is also Russia. And then you have here India, Nepal, Bhutan, but it is neighboring Russia. It has been in many conflicts over its borders with Russia. But right now, China and Russia are becoming very strong friends or very strong allies. Now, China also has access to the China Sea, which is here, or to the Strait of Taiwan. For you to have an idea, about 30% of all cargo on Earth passes through here. Now, China is also a big manufacturer, as we're going to be seeing in the presentation. So it went from being a very poor country to having like the largest producer of the planet. It's very difficult for you to look in your home and find something which is not made in China or does not have some of its part made in China. So this is the port, like the ship routes of China. Now, China is also becoming more present in Africa, as we're going to be seeing. So China is right now exercising its cultural, economic, and military power or might as soft power and hard power. And of course, it is in border zones as Myanmar, Himalayas, Afghanistan, and so forth. I want to give an example to you of what's happening in China. So we're playing a video to you guys on how China plays its soft power. Just listen to this.
Called the movie Propaganda. Wolf Warrior 2 shows China as a liberating force in Africa. There's a lot of flag waving, and in the final scene, the Chinese hero beats up the white American guy.
Do you remember your last line in the film? You're about to stab him, and you say, "People like you."
Right. People like you will always be inferior to people like me.
You know that's not what it says in Chinese, right?
No.
So what it says in the subtitles is, in this world, there are the weak and the strong, and your race will always be the weak.
Right.
The Chinese audience is seeing this white American dude telling a Chinese person, "You are the weak race,
right.
We are the strong race."
Right.
And then Wu Jin comes up and kills the dude,
right.
and says, "That's history."
And then people cheer, I'm sure. Talk about registering with the zeitgeist in China. I mean, this guy, like, I was laughing at a lot of things he was doing. I said, this movie's ridiculous. Some of this is ridiculous.
So the point I wanted to pay attention is how they also play with the fact that most of the population in China do not have access to English, and they can play with the subtitles. So they're using that to influence their people, to get the support of their people. Let's look at the economic power of China. We'll show geographically what it is. Took a little glimpse at where China is playing soft power, the flag waving, China being portrayed in the movies as the liberator of Africa. The same things, by the way, is true for Russia. Now, let's look at the economic power of China. So China has undergone rapid economic expansion since 1979. So it came from the Great Famine, and then of course, then the new leader kind of opened its doors. And also there is a lot of influence from the US. The US started to trade with China, which in my view was a big mistake. So according to the estimate from the IMF, the largest world economy outlook, the country will account for 18.8% of the world's GDP. China will be responsible for 20% of the planet's GDP based on the purchasing power parity, or PPP. Now, if you don't know what purchasing power parity is instead of looking at exchange rates between currencies, is a way to measure how much people can purchase. It's similar to like the Big Mac index. How many Big Macs makes a minimum wage in a country? Those kind of prices give you a better view of how things work in that country. So that is the triple P, PPP, the purchasing power parity. So the GDP of China has grown from 178 billion to 14.72 trillion, and it is today the world's second largest economy. Of course, it's only coming after the US, but the thing is, the US create this. The US start to trade with China. China start to offer cheap labor to the US. A great percentage of this money is because of the US. And the hope was, if they become prosperous with capitalism, they're going to stop being socialist. And I think that was the wrong bet, at least in my view. The US is now literally feeding and making China to become big enough to challenge the US. I find it very difficult for a country to grow economically without growing militarily, because you got to be able to defend whatever assets you have. You can see here, that is from just 8.1% 2 decades ago. So China is kind of more than doubling how much they can produce and their participation on GDP in just 20 years. So the light color is in 2002 and the dark color is 2022. And you can see how China went from 8.1 to 18. But you can see how the US is actually going down. It went from 19.8% to 15. So is there a point of measure, like in 20 years, China is catching up in terms of GDP with the US. And you can see here Europe is going down. So basically the West is shrinking, but China is rising. Now, over the past few decades, China also has grown to become, as we said, the world's largest manufacturing place. China produces a lot of things. And my question is always a way to compare this. Imagine a house where you don't produce anything and you get a salary from the government. That's a consumer. Now, if you're in your house and I don't know, whoever lives in your house starts to produce things, that house is going to become wealthy very quickly. And that's pretty much what's happening to China. It just saw that the potential was on becoming a large producer. It is also the largest goods exporter by a significant margin. Like everything, like I said, is made in China. Like a lot of the things in our house is made in China. Again, the bet on the US was, let's make China capitalist. So while China allows capitalism to free enterprise to thrive, you have to understand every company in China has a participation of the Chinese Communist Party. Like the Communist Party are a business partner in every private enterprise in China. And they maintain pretty much a stranglehold on the finance and also participation on whatever financially progress or prosperity is brought by that company. China is also very aggressive towards companies that does not match their agenda. So for instance, Facebook, Netflix, Google, and a few other things do not come to China. And of course, they have their own version of it in there. China is also pretty much sitting on top of a lot of deposits of coal, oil, and natural gas. So it has a lot of resources inside its territory. The point I want to make here, I think, is most significant, and I'm going to give you a little piece of information that we're going to be talking about in the future when I talk about ESG and the issues with ESG, is this. China is one of the world's largest producers and exporters of aluminum, gold, iron, magnesium, and other metals, including rare earths. And if you do not know what rare earths is, just think of a solar panel. It is mostly this. Now, rare earth, over 90% of rare earth is within Chinese territory. So when you talk about going to ESG and getting everywhere in the world with solar power, that means a lot of power to China, because they hold the mineral resources that we need for this. Only 90% of all rare earths are in China. So also they are leading the technology of 5G. They're the one who brought 5G to us. You can see here, the new internet technology 5G is produced by Huawei, a Chinese company that receives hundreds of billions of dollars from the Communist Party. I cannot play this footage, so I just want to show here, China launches world's largest 5G network. I don't want to play this because I may have problems with copywriting. Now let's look at the military strength of China. China has the world's largest army with 2.8 million active troops and the highest military budget after the US. US is almost 4 times larger, 237 billion, and then the US is around 730 billion. But I submit to you that China has more military expenses than the US, in the sense that this 237 billion, it is mostly in China. Like, you cannot attack China. Whereas the US, 730 billion, a lot of that is abroad. So the 237 billion of China is pretty much focused on China. Now, China's nuclear arsenal also is growing very rapidly. They don't have wars, they are not going to war, so they're pretty much getting ammunition and preparing themselves for a conflict. You can see here, the inventory of tanks, warships, planes, and aircraft carriers are growing rapidly in China, whereas the US, via NATO, they're depleting that as they go to different conflicts, such as the war in Ukraine. China displays full military might in a huge anniversary parade, like this Xi Jinping, and they show like all the nuclear missiles, like not all, but like all the different technology they have militarily. China has nearly 600 satellites in orbit. They have their own GPS system. They're not dependent on the US. Now, 229 of those 600 satellites are for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites, which means they can be spying anywhere on Earth with their satellites the same way US can with theirs. One thing which I think China is ahead is cyber capabilities. They pretty much have a deal with their hackers. Of course, you don't find evidence of this, but the word is hackers can hack whatever companies they want. They can keep the money. The Chinese government would not do anything with them unless they hurt the government. However, when the Chinese government knock on their door and say, we need you to hack X, Y, Z, they do it. And also they get reward from the government if they do hack any American or Western company. China has initiated a global infrastructure project to create trade corridors and unite more than 100 countries called the Belt and Road Initiative. And if you speak Latin, that is called the New Silk Road. So this is how much infrastructure they're trying to connect pretty much themselves to the other extreme of the continent, all the way from here to Spain. They also have the idea of coming to Portugal. But you can see they have trains, they have ships. So these are the routes they have. This is one example. And Xi Jinping wants a new globalization that is set aside from the old Western rules. So we want to have another world where there's China on one side and the US on the other side, pretty much as we had the Soviet Union and the US in the past. China has a philosophy which is hide your strength, bide your time. And they have another thing which says, you need to show power. So he adopted the Sun Tzu, China's ancient master, his strategist: appear weak when you're strong and strong when you're weak. However, there's another philosophy in China which says authority you should not show, but power can only be power if you show and use it. And China is not like hiding their power right now. Xi Jinping believes that China no longer needs to hide its strength. Xi Jinping thinks that he has the chance to expand and to really put a fight with the US. And I believe that he's counting with the alliance of Russia. I believe the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Xi Jinping cannot afford to have Russia to lose it. He needs Russia to continue this conflict so he can weaken the US. And here's another headline about China. Xi Jinping warns against Cold War tensions. So he sees a new Cold War between China and the US. Let's just recap. We look a little bit, took a glimpse of China resources, China economic power, and specifically China military power. And as I said, this is just the first of a series. We're going to be looking at other things in China, and then in the future, we're going to be comparing China versus US. Now, if you want to be in more control of your money, have more information on things that may affect the performance of assets, please consider subscribing to the Academy or join the Academy, Crypto Vagabonds Academy. And with this, I stop this presentation and I handle the floor to you guys with your Q&A.